I'm Dr. Dan Cox, a professor of counseling psychology at the University of British Columbia, and welcome to Psychotherapy and Applied Psychology, where we explore practical insights with leading experts. Today I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Castro, a world authority on military culture and military to civilian transition. In our conversation today, we discuss military culture, military identity, transitioning from military to civilian life, and much more. Please leave a comment below, and if you enjoy this conversation, it'd be appreciated if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This episode starts with my guest responding to my question about why he joined the military. Let's jump in.
I joined the military for education. I mean, there's nothing. I didn't join because I was super patriotic, although I am super patriotic. That isn't why I joined. There are lots of people who are patriotic who've never served in the military. So, you know, my brother was in the military. He was in the Army. That's why I picked the Army over any of the other services, which isn't terribly different than why other people join. Sometimes people join to be different than their dad. So their dad was in the Marines, so they joined the Army, or the dad was in the Navy, so they joined the Air Force, or something like that. But I don't have any unique stories about that, other than, you know, it was a chance for education. I come from a very poor background, and so this was a way to get a college education. And quite honestly, I was just looking for a 1 or 2 year scholarship, and I got a 4-year scholarship. And with the 4-year scholarship came a commitment to serve longer, which I didn't know. I was very naive about all of that. So it's, so I sort of stumbled through how I got to where I got. Even when I got my PhD, I went to the Green to Gold program, and I was actually volunteered. At the time, they were having trouble getting people to join. Now it's highly competitive. But when I went, they couldn't get people. So they basically sent down a tasking to battalions saying, cough up 2 soldiers. And my first sergeant came to me and said, Castro, you're going to become an officer. He goes, you're going to the Green to Go program. That's how I ended up. Then I got to college, and I thought, wow, I really like this. And said, "What? How can I stay?" And then you could get a PhD, but you could only get a PhD in certain areas, and psychology was one of them. So I went to psychology. That's how much thought I put into this. And then when I got my PhD, I called up because I was branch transferred to the infantry, and I called my infantry branch officer, and I said, "Yeah, this is Lieutenant Castro. I'm ready." Because I was commissioned. I said, "I'm ready to come back on active duty." And he goes, "Oh, great." I said, "I got my PhD. I'm finishing up in the spring and in the May." And he goes, "Oh, great. What'd you get your degree in?" And I said, "Psychology." And literally on the phone, my career manager goes, "What in the fuck did you do that for?" And I was like, and he goes, "Now you're going to go into the medical service corps." I didn't even know what the medical service corps was. And so he transferred me over, and the guy picked that, goes, he goes, "Lieutenant Castro, welcome. Glad to have you." So it was from this anger to this. And then from there, I went to San Antonio. And, so the whole thing was just complete naive, no.
So, why didn't he want you to get your degree in
Well, I
psychology?
guess because once you pick a certain degree, that means you're going to be in a certain branch. And since I had a PhD in psychology, that's a medical service corps. I didn't know that when I picked psychology. I just said, well, that was the only one they would give me a delay to continue in school for. That's why I picked it. And so it goes, now you're going to become a medical service corps. So I did. I went to basic officer basic course at San Antonio, and then started my research career in the medical service corps side. Then, just continued to work hard and, publish and do all of that. And so when I was getting ready to leave active duty, the academic position opened up that I was qualified for. So I was hired at University of Southern California. So, but none of it was planned.
So what's the Green to Gold? Well, I don't know what that is. I mean, I sort of got it based on what you said.
The Green to Gold program is a program for enlisted soldiers to become officers. Because what had happened is there were a lot of battlefield commissions and a lot of folks who enlisted who became officers during World War II. And these folks who were junior officers now were senior officers, and they thought one of the problems with the leadership among the officers is not enough of them had enlisted experience. They forgot or didn't know what it was like to be a soldier. So they wanted more officers with that experience. So they created this Green to Gold program and said, yeah, let's do this program. And nobody wanted to do it. And so they said, okay, we're going to, in typical Army fashion, you're going to be voluntold. So technically, I volunteered for it, but I was ordered you were doing this.
And just
So
so
that's
just I
classic
know.
Army culture, by the way. It is classic military culture where you are voluntold. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before,
Mhm.
but that's what it's called. It's voluntold. It's like you're volunteering to do this, right? Yeah, yeah, right. I'm volunteering. I'm not volunteering. I'm being ordered to do this. But what am I going to say? No.
So just because there probably will be some listeners who don't know, just real
Well,
quick,
we
sort
don't
of a
even have to talk
commission
about
versus.
that. We don't
No, no,
even
no,
have
no,
to
no,
talk
no, no,
about
no.
that. So,
Can you say that, because this is going to be important, the difference between a commissioned and a non-commissioned officer?
yeah. So the enlisted soldiers, you have to have basically either a high school degree or the graduate education diploma, which is the equivalent, the GED. Um, and officers must have a college degree to be an officer. Now, there are a lot of enlisted with college degrees who are not officers because they didn't want to be an officer. They wanted to be an enlisted soldier. But the officers, when you think about it, from the officers are the ones who plan missions, plan operations. The enlisted soldiers are the ones who execute the operation. That's that's the big difference. And
So
there's a heck of a
commissioned are
lot
sort
more
of the
enlisted than there are officers. But
right. So commissioned are kind of the managers.
yeah, they're the manager. They're the ones that become the generals and the admirals, and the enlisted are the ones who become the command master chiefs and command sergeant majors. That's the that's the career path. And of course, you get paid a lot more as an officer, right? Which I always kind of knew but didn't fully appreciate. But you get paid a lot more as an officer than you do as an enlisted.
So how did you end up getting down the research track?
So, because I had a PhD, you could do clinical or you could do research. There are very few pure research positions in the military, and I got tracked early on because they needed someone at the if you can see from my CV, they needed someone at the Institute of Chemical Defense. This is how much thinking the military puts into it. They needed someone to run their non-human primate laboratory. And they go, oh well, this guy's a psychologist. We're primates. This is close enough. I had no experience running a non-human primate lab, but that's how much thinking goes into this. So I got, and then of course I'm one of these people. I love to learn new things, so I just immersed myself and became an expert for a 4 or 5 year period in non-human primates, and about the ecology and all of that stuff around them, how to care for them, and all of that kind of stuff. But that's and so I got that job and I did so well in it that they just continued to track me. And then I would do kind of these forays of more psychological mental health stuff along the way. But primarily, you would say my main bold track was I was a, a clinical researcher, if you will, a clinical psychology researcher is what I did. And of course, that set me up for academia. And if you would have asked me when I accepted this academic job 1 week before I was offered it, hey, what about going into academia when you leave the military? Not only would I have said no, I'd have said, hell no, I've got zero interest in that. Best decision I ever made in terms of career wise. I absolutely love it. It's a phenomenal job. I love what I do. I thought being in the military was the best job I ever had. Not the best job I ever have is the one I have right now. It's a great job. It's a great job. It gives me lots and lots of freedom to pursue lots and lots of different things, which I didn't. I pursued a lot of different things in the military, but not nearly to the extent that I am now.
And was that somebody? Did somebody because you said you would have said hell no. So did somebody convince you?
Well, the dean at the time at the School of Social Work, they were looking for somebody to help with their research looking at transition. And of course, I studied transitions in on active duty. So transitioning into the military, transitioning to deployments, transitioning home from deployments. That's really the overarching framework in which I worked. And so this was just the back end of the transitioning out of the military. So it was a real natural extension and good fit for what I had done in the military. So it was one of those rare situations where the exact same thing or content I was doing while I was on active duty was applicable post military service. So it wasn't a complete new career. In fact, I would almost argue it was a continuation of my
Huh.
military career. One could argue that. I remember talking to the dean. I said, one of the interesting things about academia in the military is they are both medieval institutions. They were both developed during the medieval times. That, by the way, in the clergy. And so there's similarities between all three of these professions with the robes and the uniforms and the formalities. And, so in that sense, it also made my transition easier because it was kind of like moving from one medieval institution to another with, some important differences. It's a different culture and the traditions are different. And, some universities, professors still lecture in gowns. At least in academia, we only do it at commencement and graduations, right? We don't have to wear them all the time, but there's still, and of course, rank is still important in academia, although we like to pretend it's not, right? We
Right.
don't wear our rank on our collar, but the clergy wear their rank in their uniform, right? Their gowns they wear and the robes they wear. In military, it's the rank and insignia on your uniform. So there's a lot of I've always had this. I don't know if I'll ever write it, but I'm always going to write this paper about how the military, the church, and academia are similar, and because a lot of people like try to make the elitism in academia, but there's elitism in the military and there's elitism in the church too, right? If you're a deacon or bishop or cardinal or the pope or there's these hierarchies that are very formal. And
Mhm.
in the Catholic Church you literally kiss the ring, and in the military you salute, and in an academia you kind of act like it doesn't matter, but it really matters when it comes to getting good teaching assignments and good office spaces and things like that. So it matters. All of this stuff matters. So they're just different, but I was going to like sort of, here's how they're similar, here's how they're different, but we got probably more similarities than differences. The differences
Well,
are really more superficial. The
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you because we're going to get into talking about military culture and transition and these sorts of things. And what I was going to ask you was, well, I guess when you were talking, I was thinking about what the differences are culturally between the military and academia. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was, what is it like? Because the military is, overtly hierarchical, right? I mean, it
oh
is
yeah, oh
clear and
yeah,
it is intentional. And then I was thinking like, well, the universe or academia isn't. But then I sort of started thinking about it as you were talking. And I was sort of thinking like, in a way it isn't, right? Because in a way, day to day, I can do what I want to do. I can study the things I want to study. I have academic freedom. I have a tremendous amount of latitude in what I
yeah.
teach and how I teach it. But in other ways, it really is hierarchical also. And so I guess,
Well,
well, so
the
sorry, go
highest
ahead.
paying jobs in academia are what? Administrative jobs.
Yeah.
they're not.
Yeah. The
They're
dean, then
not.
the president or yeah.
Yeah, they're not the. And if you look at the growth of academia, most all of the growth in personnel have been at the administrative level, not at the faculty level, right? And so when people want to talk about what's driving up the cost of academia, and I don't want to get into this topic on this podcast, but it's the growth of the administration. The cost and the growth of the administration is, it's, I think the last number, a 20-fold increase, whereas the number of students and faculty are almost on top of each other, but all the administrative overhead, right? And those are the I'm not going to say the pointless job. Some people would say that administration is really important. You have to question whether or not we need that much administration. At least I would question that, but others may say, "Oh no, we could justify." But one of the things I always tell my faculty, I said, I had more input into decisions when I was in the military than I do as a professor at the university,
Wow.
by a bunch. It wasn't like, let's just ask the faculty what they want us to do and we'll do whatever we want anyway, but we'll just
Right.
go through the motions of getting input. In the military, they really wanted to hear what people had to say because people were experts. Whereas in academia, our president, and by the way, I discovered this is new to our university, but I'm just picking on our university because I know it the best. They will hire a consultant to do a survey of faculty when you have expert surveyors that are in the university who could do it for like free or a course release, some minimal amount of money. But no, you'll spend 2-3 million on a consulting company to do what you have the experts at your university. It's just you don't trust them. So because you want to control the messaging and if the faculty get it, they could just share it. And so there's this real lack of trust in academia that you don't see in the military. And there's a more, it's more, and it's in a crazy way. The military is more democratic than academia. And I think it's the horseshoe phenomenon, the horseshoe on the political spectrum, where really conservative and really progressive folks, this horseshoe starts bending towards authoritarianism, opaqueness, don't second guess my decision. The military's built to second guess decisions. We call those after action reviews. After every military operation, you critique it. What went wrong? What went right? How did it go wrong? You never see that in academia. I've never been part of a true after action review where a terrible decision was made. How did we get here? How can we learn from it? In fact, more often than not, faculty aren't even included in that decision. And so, in some ways, I say the military is more democratic than this supposedly progressive, inclusive environment. So but on the surface, because if you look at the progressiveness in the new ideas that come out of the universities, you think, oh, everybody's these free thinking, highly inclusive people, but they're really not. I mean, academians really don't like new ideas, and they don't like
Mm-hmm.
ideas that counter the norm, right? Whereas in the military, there is sort of a group think because you tend to promote people who think like you. In academia, they hire people who think like you, right? So the promotions are like perfunctory. In the military, it's more egalitarian from the lieutenant up. You get this broad, and then there's this funneling of sort of, if you will, I don't know, uh, toeing the line, so to speak. So you have to sort of fit in, and do you think like an officer? Do you act like an officer? Uh, in an academia, it's how inclusive are you, in your thinking, and if you're too inclusive, like if you include people we want to exclude, then your thinking is considered radical, right? And so that's the part that's different at the deeper level, right? But there's also, and rank is really important. I mean, anytime you talk to someone in academia, you only have to talk to them for like 10 seconds and they'll tell you they're a full professor, right? It's like, because I can't tell, right, from just looking at you. So you want me to make sure that I know that you're a full professor and you've been here for 25 years. So it's that kind of, and we're in the military, in the veteran, like I said, how can I write these sort of stupid one-liner jokes, and I said, how can you tell if someone's a veteran? They'll tell you. Usually just for men, though. Women are like, there's some differences between men and women veterans, but a man will tell you in like 10 seconds that they're a veteran. They'll come right up to you. If they find out that I'm a veteran, they'll come right up and tell me they're a veteran, where they served and all that stuff. Totally, I don't even have to ask anything. They'll just share all that information. And it's very similar to academia because people want to know, I got a grant, they'll tell you about it. And, so it's because how else will I know that unless you tell me? So
Hmm.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there is this sense of bravado, if you will, in
Hmm.
academia because I can't tell from your uniform what your rank is and where you've been. You got to tell me, just like a veteran will have to tell me. But if you were on active duty in uniform, I could just look at your uniform and tell so much about you that I don't have to ask a lot of questions because I can see, oh, your rank. Do I outrank you? Do you outrank me? I can see how many awards you've had, where you've been based on the awards you have. So you can tell a lot about a person just from looking at their uniform. You can't tell that in academia in the veteran because they have to tell you that. And veterans aren't really good sometimes at bragging and telling you all the things they've done. And so that can make it a challenge too for them because it's if you talk about it too much, then people get suspicious on how good you are, right? And I find myself the same way with academia. When someone's telling me about all of their academic accomplishments, I immediately get suspicious of whether or not I'm getting the real version, versus like, well, really, like I had one faculty member who always tells me, I've been NIH funded consecutively for 27 years, right? He tells me that. And I know it's not true, but he says that to me anyway. And I said, I always want to say why. I always want to say this. I never do because he's a good colleague. I said, why are you saying that? You know that's not true. I know for a fact that you had 5 years with no grants. But what are you telling me you continuously funded? I almost want to say you're not talking to your wife or the dean. You're talking to somebody who knows your record. And it doesn't in any way diminish him. I mean, he's got a beautiful career, but why do you have to embellish it like that? Just anyway. So those kinds of things you see in the military too, by the way.
So let because I think we're sort of like dancing around it, and I kind of think we should jump into it because in talking about military culture and talking about like those, and I know that you sort of pushed back on this idea of like military as a subculture rather than just like military as a culture. So I'm wondering, I don't know the best way into this conversation, but perhaps you can just sort of like, because one of the things that's going to be worth people hearing about is trying to better understand military culture, and probably in particular the types of things that folks are going to struggle with as they
Yeah,
transition
exactly.
into
And that's
civilian
what
life.
and that's what led me, by the way, to this is what are those things that make it challenging? And as you know, one of the things that just recently, not recently meaning in the last 7 or 8 years, that really has been fully now appreciated is your military identity is really important in how that shapes the transition. Well, what is identity? Identity is how you relate to your culture, whether it's your race or your gender or your ethnicity or where you come from, right? It's how you think about things. It's how you feel about things. It's the words you use. Your vocabulary drives how you think about things. And the biggest challenge that service members have is trying to be the way they were in the military, which made them successful,
Hmm.
and that won't make them as successful as a civilian because civilians think differently. And the bravado is minimized. The teamwork is what's emphasized. In academia, it's all about what I've done, not what my team has done, not what me and my colleagues have done, but what I have achieved, right? And in the military, you're promoted based on individual achievements, just like you are in academia. But in academia, that's the language people use. I published this paper, I published this book, I got this grant, not we got this grant. I published this paper with, you in the military, it's a very we team vocabulary, where in academia, it's a very me vocabulary. It's a I, me centric vocabulary. And that's one of the biggest things but that's not unique to academic. You see that in the American culture in general. So this is why, okay, this is a culture difference now. We're not talking about a subculture difference. We're talking about a culture difference where you talk about what the team accomplished. And when we all reflect on it, we realize we've got a lot of help to be successful, right? That a lot of people help us be successful, and both in the military, the folks I work with at University of Southern California, all have made me successful, and contributed to my success. So anyway,
So that's one of the big cultural differences is the I versus we.
I think so. I think so.
Right.
I think so.
But
Now, each service is a little different. The Air Force is more I and me than the Army and the Marine Corps are, and I think that comes from one of the key natures of the job. Like piloting is about you as a pilot, right? You don't. And when they've done away with co-pilots, it is about you and what you've done, and so. And even in academia, somebody has to be PI on a grant, right? Somebody has to be first author on a paper or senior author on a paper, right? So it's part of it is the cult, but I would argue that was built because of the culture, not the other way around. Like the dean doesn't know, like DOD for a while went through doing multiple PI awards because DOD recognized that you get recognized being a PI, so they would do multiple PI awards. The dean doesn't. Our dean didn't know what to do with that. She goes, "What am I supposed to do with that? Who gets credit for the grant?" She couldn't get her head around. Well, both of us get credit for the grant. That's what the multiple PI award means. She goes, I don't know what that means. It's just because it's the deep culture of one person's going to get credit for this grant, not two. That was the sort of thinking. And I thought, I get it. I get it. You've been around your entire life with that thinking. You're not just going to one group change that thinking overnight. They want one person who's the PI, not this multiple PI stuff. They understand like multiple site PIs, but they didn't understand if you're at the same place how you could have multiple. That's the thing.
So you developed this what you call military transition theory, which is sort of a way of framing the sort of the transition process, if you will. And I was thinking that sort of, if you could give us like an overview of that general model, that could be helpful for people in terms of thinking about what some of the normal challenges that veterans might experience are.
Sure. Transitions are not unique. Right. I don't think enough time is spent on transitions or understanding transitions, because when things go wrong in life, they're usually around transitions. Right. So and also opportunities. So things can go bad, but things can really go better. Sort of key transitions that we all go through. Well, hopefully we all go through. And that is moving out of your parents' home. Right. Now, I know that there's some people who now move to the basement, but that's not what I'm talking about. Like moving out and starting living on your own, getting married, huge transition, huge. An even bigger one is having kids. Nobody really understands having kids until you have a kid. It's not the same as having 3 cats and 2 dogs. They're very different things. So these are all major transitions. And, and when things can, you're happy about many of these transitions, but there's also fraught with problems, right? You can starting a new job is a transition. Going away to college is a new transition. Joining the military, that's a transition from being a civilian to being in uniform. And then transition into deployments, changing jobs. In the military, we change jobs on purpose. There's no such thing as a 40-year-old private. We don't allow that. We have an up or out system. Most people don't even appreciate that about the military, that if you don't get promoted, you get kicked out. Kind of like academia, right? If you don't get the one promotion, gone. These are similarities, by the way, between the military. Now, you don't have to become a full professor, but in the military, if you make, usually it's the rank of major, lieutenant colonel, then you can stay and retire at those ranks. But you have to make several promotions. Same thing with the enlisted personnel too. They have to make so many promotions or they get kicked out. So this up or out system. And then we have mandatory retirement. and you're usually around 50s and you have to go. So everyone then should be thinking, what am I going to do when I leave the military? Because that's an important thing. Very few people can retire at 50, certainly in the military. You're going to have to do something else. And so this is why this big emphasis now in the military has been for some time about preparing for your life after the military. What are you going to do? What do you want to do? And that's a hard question, because if you joined the military straight from living with your parents, you don't know what it's like to live as a civilian. I jokingly say that there are two major socialist systems in America. And I know we don't like to call them socialist because socialism is bad, right? Ooh, bad, evil. But the family is a socialist system, right? I have to provide for my kids food, clothing, shelter, education, whether they contribute anything or not to the Castro household. I got to provide for them. You join the military, and the military provides everything for you: housing, food, clothing, health care, everything. Part of the package. That's socialism. We don't call it that. It's what it is. It's unlimited health care, unlimited dental care. You have banks, there's commissaries, there's the dining facilities, barracks, housing allowance, all that's provided. If that's all you know when you leave the military, you're 30, 40, 50 years old, you really don't know what it's like to live and compete for an apartment, to how much things even cost because they are provided for you. And this can get in the way of the transition too, because you think it's going to be easy because you went to combat, you served 3 combat tours, and you're a senior NCO or you're a field grade officer, and you come out and you say, oh my goodness, there's a lot of decisions I have to make that I never really thought about because other people were making them for me. Like where you had to be, what uniform you had to be in, what you were doing that day. And so being in academia is a complete opposite of that, where I don't even know if I'm going to go into the office today, right? In the military, you're going to go to work every day because someone's going to be holding a formation and seeing if you're there. There's a real accountability. And so you develop this sense of accountability in the military, and you often see a lack of accountability among your civilian counterparts, right? So this can lead to clashes of culture. In my culture, you show up on time, in the right uniform, prepared to work hard until you're dismissed. In academia, for example, you have flexibility. As long as you teach your classes, you're in your class where you're supposed to be. You don't see anything outrageously insulting to anybody, you're going to be in pretty good shape. You're going to be in pretty good shape. Otherwise, the dean will leave you alone. So those are really important. Being to meetings on time is like really important in the military. We have a saying in the Army that if you're 10 minutes early, you're on time. In academia, people show up late all the time for meetings. In fact, that was one of the first things I got in trouble for when I came to the University of Southern California. I'd be in a meeting. And one of the things, too, in academia, they schedule crazy long meetings. And it was a 2-hour meeting, and faculty member comes in 40 minutes late of a 2-hour meeting. And the chair, and I don't mind that. I got used to people showing up late, especially in California. And the chair stopped the meeting and started telling the person who showed up late everything that we had discussed. And so I get up to leave. And the chair goes, Carl, where are you going? And I said, well, I was here. I know what was said at this meeting. I'm going to go get a coffee. And she goes, well, how will you know when to come back? I said, well, if I miss anything, you can just update me like you're doing him. And she told the dean on me for that. I got in trouble. The dean goes, you can't be treating your colleagues like that. You need to be more respectful. You're a junior faculty, that kind of. And it was inappropriate, admittedly, in retrospect. But I was just irritated. It happens all the time. And then after that, I started gradually changing the culture in our school where people would text me and say, "Oh, I'm going to be 2 minutes late. I'm sorry." Being on time is important, and starting a meeting on time and ending on time is important. And there was visibly a change where people would start meetings on time and they say, being conscious of time, we're going to stop on time. And because in academia, we don't know how to stop a meeting early. We just will fill the time because it's there, even though, well, we made an hour, but we're really done in 20 minutes. We'll keep going because we don't know how to stop a meeting. But anyway, those are things that is a culture difference between the military and academia. And
Well, what jumped out in your story real fast, what jumped out in your story is that you, because of your position, because of your personality, because of the context you were working in, you were actually able to change the culture somewhat to come to you.
yes,
Right. That like people, but that's not like that has to be less common than common,
oh yeah,
right? That has to be the minority of cases. So I'm thinking about the other service member who retires and goes into civilian life, and they're just in a situation where the thing that was driving you up a wall is driving them up a wall. You had the personality and the context and the ability to change it, but they don't,
yeah.
and that they're stuck in this
yes,
kind of hell
yeah.
of experiencing that regularly.
And I think people like to start meetings on time. I think everybody who has to go to a meeting wants it to start on time. If I go to a concert that's supposed to start at 6 o'clock, I'm not happy when it starts at 6:40. Been sitting there for 40 minutes. Why aren't we starting on time? Right? And then of course now it's going to go late, and people have maybe had plans afterwards, or you have to leave because you have another meeting right after the one that now is running over because it didn't start on time. So I think most people like to start meetings on time. I find that a lot of things that I say, and you're spot on, half the other group's thinking the same thing. I'm just saying it out loud. And but you're right, you have to be in a position where you can do that or you could get in trouble. And because one of the things that human nature, some people carry grudges, they wait to pay you back for making them look bad publicly or a comment you made. And of course, that's not why you make a comment. You just want, if this person missed something, they could read the minutes next week. We've got somebody here taking minutes. Why are we stopping the meeting? And you're wasting everybody's time who was there on time. So, and then that just feeds itself to then everybody being late because you're not going to start on time. This meeting never starts on time. I can show up 5-10 minutes late. I won't miss anything. And so that just sits, I think, is the wrong culture to have in any organization. And, I always get a little time in trouble because I'll ask, someone will be chairing a meeting, and I'll say, are any decisions going to be made at this meeting? I always ask that ahead of time. Now, in academia, academics don't like to make decisions. So this is another culture difference. Whereas the military, especially the Army, we want to make decisions. In the Army, they'll make decisions without all the information. They'll make a decision. Where in academia, they'll want more information than you would ever need to make a decision. So that's a big culture difference. So, but I do ask, is there any decisions that are going to be made? And if only because if there is, I want to know if there's something I need to read and understand before the meeting, before we make the decision. I don't want to have a vote on an issue that I haven't thought about and that I've not read the background information on. Otherwise, you're going to probably make a bad one. In academia, it probably won't matter that much. But still, we need to get in the habit, if we're going to make a decision, it should be on the agenda. We are going to decide these things at this meeting. Or is it just going to be an information meeting? And because if it's just going to be an information meeting, I'm not even sure I want to go. So, and I think that's why they don't want to tell me ahead of time, because they know I probably won't show up if I tell them there's no decision being made. So, but if it's sharing information is important, and I'm not saying it's not, but it's like, if we're going to make a decision, let's make that decision or know about it before, not decide to make it during the meeting as we're discussing it. That's usually leads to bad decisions, I think.
So what do you think in the US, what are the things that you've seen either through the military, through other services, programs that are, or supports or whatever, that help service members make the transition successfully?
You know, I don't have a favorite organization because I think there are lots of great organizations out there. One of the things that I tell, like if I could only tell a separating service member one thing, what would the advice be? And it was almost the advice I would give to anyone how they should conduct their entire life. Never lose your hustle. Never lose your hustle. Everything's a competition. You have to compete for the job that you get when you leave the military. No one's just going to give you the job because you serve 4 combat tours. They're not going to do that. You've got to show how what you can do can contribute to their organization. So just don't lose your hustle. Realize that in every day you wake up, what are you going to accomplish today? Don't rest on your past laurels. You got to keep moving forward. Just like an academic, I published 100 papers. Well, how many did you publish last year, right? That's the criteria for the evaluation for your annual performance review. It's called annual performance review, not lifetime performance review. So you want to know what is your accomplishments, and it's every year. You should have some very concrete goals of what you're going to achieve. So don't lose your hustle. And if you start losing your hustle, you start slowing down, you're not producing anything, then in academia, you're called deadwood. And in the military, they call it, somebody's just waiting on retirement, right? They're just marking time until they retire. Every organization has names for people who do that. And don't be like that. If you want to be a contributor, just be thinking, okay, what is the boss value? What is the organization value that I'm at? And do those things that they value, and you're going to be successful. But don't ever expect something to be given to you because of something you've accomplished in the past. I just think that's the most fundamental thing. Now, one of the challenges most veterans have, our service members have when they leave the military, is they don't really know what they want to do. They know what they don't want to do. They don't want to do what they did in the military. About 70, 80% want to do something different. So I would love to see organizations help separating service members, help figure that out. Like, okay, what do you want to do? Let's talk about what you're interested in, what your skills are, whether or not you need to go back to the university or a VOTEC school or get some additional credentials. That will help them transition better if they know what they want to do. And that's necessarily what they're going to do for the rest of their life. Anyone who's been to the university, what's the average number? I haven't looked at this data in a while, but when I was an undergraduate, I think there were 4 different majors on average that everybody had before they picked one. Right. So you change because you don't know. You think you know what you want to do, and then you go to the university and go, "Oh, I didn't even know this was a possibility. I want to do this." Then you learn something else. Then you're over here, right? So that's normal. That's not abnormal. That's typical, and it's similar with jobs and service members leaving the military. They're not really sure what they want to do. They think they know what they want to do, but they're not 100% sure. But helping them figure that out up front will help in the long term. So they're not going to go to the university and start a program that they're not interested in, but now they're already committed to, and those kinds of things. So, and because veterans feel they're already behind their peers because they got to start over. And this is one thing that's hard for a lot of people. You serve in the military, for 10 years, 5 years, you get out, and you feel you're behind your high school classmates who went right into work. And, I tell my own story, not that leaving active duty, moving into academia is a sad story. It's a great story. But I started out as an assistant professor. Although under any other, if you looked at my CV at the time, you said, no, you should be a full professor. I didn't start out as a full professor. Why not? Because the university didn't know me from Adam. They didn't want to make me a full professor and then I just retire on the spot and never work again. Because once you get tenure, then what's my motivation? And now I got rapid promotions. I made full professor in about 6 years. So they saw, you get credit, but they want to see if you got a game, right? They want to see if you still got it. You're still hustling. That's what they're looking for. Are you still hustling to get grants, write papers, do research, make a contribution, make an impact, all of those things. And I understand why they did that. I probably would be, on the other side, be thinking similarly. But you could say, well, they're not appreciating all my accomplishments. And that would have been an accurate statement too. But are you going to dwell on that, waste energy there, or spend that energy showing them what you can do? Right? It's kind of like a veteran player leaving one team, moving to another team, still showing them you got it, right? You've got to do that. That's what all organizations are looking for. They don't want to hire someone who's only going to work 1 or 2 years and then stop working. Sort of like those who get tenure and then stop working. I don't know. Somebody told me there was a study where they looked at the number of publications before and after tenure, 5 years before and 5 years after, and there was like a drop of like 40% in productivity. And I don't know if that's true. I could never find that paper, by the way. And so I don't know if that's just sort of the cat in the microwave, but it does kind of resonate with some anecdotal stories I know about faculty. When once you get comfortable, you don't hustle as much. And I would just say never get too comfortable. Always be hustling. Always be looking, how can you contribute? And it could be writing a research paper, it could be serving on a committee, it could be chairing a committee. It doesn't have to be the same thing, but you always want to feel that you're contributing and people around you feel you're contributing. That's what I mean when I say don't lose your hustle. Obviously, the older you get, you're going to write fewer grants and you'll be fewer first author papers. I'm rarely first author on any papers anymore. That's just part of the senior natural progression in academia, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then you should be doing other things. You should be chairing committee. You should be writing books and talking about your life and your memoirs and those kinds of that's what you have time to do before you clunk over, right? I mean, because it doesn't last forever, but you want to enjoy what you're doing. So I always tell folks too, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, find something else to do. Don't quit. Find something first. I'm told that's old-fashioned thinking, by the way. Then, having a job before you quit your job, I'm told that's old-fashioned thinking. So I'm an old-fashioned thinker because I think before you quit a job, you should have another job, not quit and then find a job. That's just me. I guess I am old-fashioned.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to check out the second part of this conversation. Until next time,